Multiple bogies on scope, not in database. Copy, they're moving fast, possible formation. Alert command, this is serious.
The radar screens glow softly inside a NATO early warning station in Eastern Europe. It is just after midnight. Rows of analysts watch satellite feeds scrolling across their monitors. Signals flicker across the digital map. Aircraft activity rising along Russia's western military districts. Thousands of kilometers away, powerful radar systems connected to NATO networks track movement in the skies over the Baltic region. On another screen, military satellites detect strategic bombers lifting off from air bases deep inside Russia. In Washington, Brussels, and London, secure communication channels quietly come alive. This is not war, but it is not peace either. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world believed the confrontation between Russia and the Western alliance had ended. Yet 3 decades later, tensions between NATO and Moscow have returned with a force few expected. Military spending is rising. Armies are mobilizing. Nuclear arsenals remain on alert. And the war in Ukraine has brought the two sides closer to direct confrontation than at any time since the Cold War. Across Europe's eastern frontier, one question now echoes through war rooms and defense ministries. How close is the world to a conflict between Russia and NATO? And if that line is crossed, could it trigger World War III? In 1991, the geopolitical map of the world changed overnight. The collapse of the Soviet Union ended the long ideological struggle known as the Cold War. For the first time in nearly half a century, the rivalry between East and West appeared to be over. Across Europe, borders opened. Military tensions eased. Former Soviet states began moving toward democratic systems and market economies. For many leaders in the West, this moment marked the beginning of a new global order, one where the alliance known as NATO would expand its role as the primary security structure for Europe. Originally formed in 1949 to contain Soviet influence, NATO now faced a new question. What would its purpose be in a world where its former adversary no longer existed? The answer, many believed, was expansion. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, NATO began admitting former Warsaw Pact countries and Soviet republics. Nations that had once been part of Moscow's strategic buffer zone began joining the Western Alliance. In 1999, 3 countries entered NATO: Poland, Hungary, a Czech Republic. 5 years later, another wave followed. In 2004, NATO expanded again, welcoming 7 additional members, including the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. For many countries in Eastern Europe, joining NATO was seen as a guarantee of security, protection under the alliance's most powerful principle. Article 5. The rule stating that an attack on one NATO member is considered an attack on all. But in Moscow, the expansion looked very different. Russian leaders argued that NATO had been steadily moving closer to Russia's borders, absorbing states that had once been part of its geopolitical sphere of influence. Among the most vocal critics of NATO expansion was Vladimir Putin, who became president of Russia in 2000. Over the next 2 decades, Putin repeatedly warned that NATO's growth represented a direct threat to Russian national security. To many Western policymakers, these warnings were viewed as exaggerated. But in Russia's military doctrine, strategic geography has always mattered. For centuries, Russian defense strategy relied on buffer zones, large regions separating Russia from potential adversaries in Europe. As NATO expanded eastward, those buffers began disappearing. At the same time, Russia itself was rebuilding. The chaotic economic collapse of the 1990s had severely weakened the Russian military. Equipment was outdated, funding was limited, and morale was low. But by the early 2000s, Rising energy revenues allowed Moscow to invest heavily in modernizing its armed forces. New missile systems were developed. Air defense networks were strengthened. Strategic nuclear forces were upgraded. Russia also began testing new forms of warfare that combined conventional military power with cyber operations, information campaigns, and economic pressure. Western analysts later described this approach as hybrid warfare. The first major demonstration came in 2008. That year, Russian forces moved into Georgia after escalating tensions in the separatist regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The conflict lasted only 5 days, but it revealed that Russia was willing to use military force to defend what it viewed as its strategic interests. 6 years later, the geopolitical confrontation deepened further. In 2014, political upheaval in Ukraine triggered one of the most significant territorial disputes in Europe since World War II. Russian forces moved to secure the Crimean Peninsula. Soon after, Moscow formally annexed Crimea, a move condemned by Western governments and international organizations. Sanctions were imposed. Relations between Russia and the West rapidly deteriorated. Meanwhile, fighting erupted in eastern Ukraine between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. For NATO, the events of 2014 were a strategic wake-up call. The alliance began strengthening its military presence along its eastern flank. NATO battle groups were deployed to countries bordering Russia, including Poland and the Baltic states. Military exercises increased in frequency. Air patrol missions expanded. What had once been a distant rivalry was once again becoming a frontline security issue. But the most dramatic turning point was still to come. In February 2022, Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The largest war in Europe since World War II had begun. And suddenly, the long-standing tension between Russia and NATO was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding just beyond the alliance's eastern border. In the early hours of February 24, 2022, explosions echoed across multiple Ukrainian cities. Missiles struck military installations, airfields, and command centers. Armored columns began moving across several borders. Within hours, the world realized that Russia had launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It was the largest military operation in Europe since the end of the Second World War. The invasion shocked governments across the Western Alliance. For years, intelligence agencies had warned that tensions between Moscow and Kiev could escalate. But few expected a conflict on this scale. Within days, the crisis triggered an unprecedented political and military response from NATO and its partners. While NATO forces did not directly enter the battlefield, member states began providing large-scale military assistance to Ukraine. Advanced weapons systems, artillery, air defense equipment, intelligence support, and financial aid flowed into the country. The United States quickly emerged as the largest provider of military assistance. European nations, including United Kingdom, Germany, and France, also expanded their support. Modern anti-tank systems, precision artillery, and air defense platforms helped Ukrainian forces slow the Russian advance in the early stages of the war. At the same time, Western governments launched one of the most extensive sanctions campaigns in modern history. Financial restrictions targeted Russian banks. Technology exports were limited. Energy partnerships were reduced. Many international companies withdrew from the Russian market. The goal was clear: weaken Russia's ability to sustain a prolonged war. But the economic confrontation quickly spread beyond financial sanctions. For decades, much of Europe had relied heavily on Russian natural gas supplies. When energy flows began to decline, the crisis transformed into a broader economic struggle between Moscow and the West. Energy prices surged. Supply chains were disrupted. Governments scrambled to secure alternative energy sources. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the war settled into a grinding conflict of attrition. Russian forces consolidated control over significant territory in eastern and southern Ukraine, while Ukrainian troops launched counteroffensives aimed at reclaiming occupied areas. Drone warfare became increasingly important. Long-range missiles struck infrastructure far behind the front lines. Cyber operations targeted communications networks and government systems. Yet the most significant strategic shift was happening outside Ukraine's borders. The war had fundamentally changed Europe's security landscape. Countries that had long maintained military neutrality began reconsidering their positions. In 2023, Finland officially joined NATO, extending the alliance's border with Russia by more than 1,300 kilometers. Soon after, Sweden also moved toward NATO membership, further strengthening the alliance in Northern Europe. For Moscow, this expansion confirmed long-standing fears that the Western alliance was moving closer to its borders. For NATO, it represented a historic shift in European defense. Across the eastern flank of the alliance, military deployments increased. NATO battle groups were reinforced in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Advanced air defense systems were deployed. Fighter jets expanded patrol missions over the Baltic region. Large-scale military exercises began simulating potential conflicts with a near-peer adversary. The goal was deterrence, demonstrating that NATO territory would be defended at any cost. But deterrence carries its own risks. The closer military forces operate near each other, the greater the chance of miscalculation. An intercepted aircraft, a missile landing near the wrong border, a cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure. Any one of these incidents could trigger a rapid escalation. And as the war in Ukraine continued, the lines separating direct and indirect confrontation between NATO and Russia grew increasingly thin. The Cold War had ended more than 3 decades earlier. Yet once again, military planners on both sides were preparing for the possibility of conflict between the world's most powerful nuclear-armed alliances. The question now facing strategists was no longer whether tensions existed. The real concern was where the next crisis might emerge. Because across several regions of Europe and beyond, dangerous flashpoints were beginning to form. Across Europe's eastern frontier, several geographic locations have become focal points of military concern. These areas are not just political boundaries. They are strategic fault lines, places where forces from NATO and Russia operate within close proximity. In modern military planning, such regions are often described as flashpoints, locations where a single miscalculation could escalate into a broader confrontation. Along the northeastern edge of NATO territory lie 3 small, but strategically important countries: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. These Baltic states joined NATO in 2004. Their membership brought the alliance directly to Russia's border for the first time. From a strategic perspective, the Baltic region presents both opportunity and vulnerability. The countries are geographically close to major Russian military installations, including forces stationed near St. Petersburg and the heavily militarized enclave of Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad, located between Lithuania and Poland along the Baltic Sea, hosts advanced missile systems, naval forces, and air defense networks. Analysts believe the region contains powerful anti-access and area denial systems designed to restrict NATO operations in the event of a crisis. For NATO planners, the challenge is geography. The Baltic states are relatively small and difficult to reinforce quickly during a major conflict. Military simulations conducted by Western defense institutions have suggested that rapid Russian advances could potentially threaten the capitals of the Baltic countries within days if deterrence were to fail. To counter this risk, NATO has stationed multinational battle groups across the region. These forces are designed not only to defend territory but also to ensure that any attack would immediately involve troops from multiple alliance members. The message is clear. An attack on the Baltic states would trigger a wider response. But the very presence of opposing forces operating so closely together means that tensions remain high. Flashpoint 2. The Suwalki Gap. Further south lies one of the most frequently discussed vulnerabilities in European defense planning: a narrow stretch of land known as the Suwalki Gap. This corridor, roughly 65 kilometers wide, sits between Poland and Lithuania. To its west lies the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. To the east sits Belarus, a close military partner of Russia. Strategically, the Suwalki Gap represents the only land connection between the Baltic states and the rest of NATO territory. If a conflict were to occur and this corridor were cut off, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania could become isolated from reinforcements arriving from Western Europe. Military analysts frequently describe the Suwalki Gap as one of the most vulnerable locations in NATO's defensive structure. In response, both NATO and Russia have increased military exercises near the region. Large-scale troop movements, armored maneuvers, and air operations have all taken place in recent years. Each side insists these activities are defensive, but every exercise also serves as a demonstration of capability, a signal to the other side. Flashpoint 3, the Black Sea. While the Baltic region commands attention in Northern Europe, another strategic theater lies far to the south. The Black Sea. This body of water connects Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East, making it one of the most geopolitically sensitive maritime regions in the world. Several NATO members border the Black Sea, including Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey. Russia's most important naval base in the region is located in Sevastopol, on the Crimean Peninsula. Since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, the Black Sea has become increasingly militarized. Russian naval forces operate advanced missile systems capable of striking targets hundreds of kilometers away. NATO aircraft and surveillance drones frequently patrol the region. Warships from multiple countries conduct exercises designed to demonstrate freedom of navigation. These overlapping military activities create a complex and often tense environment. An unexpected naval encounter, a misidentified aircraft, or a drone incident over international waters. Each event carries the potential to trigger diplomatic crises, or something more serious. Across Europe's eastern and southern frontiers, the pattern is becoming clear. Military forces are concentrating near contested regions. Strategic geography is once again shaping the calculations of global powers. But geography is no longer the only factor that determines how conflicts begin. In the modern era, wars may start not only on land or at sea, but in cyberspace, in orbit, or through autonomous weapons systems operating without human control. And those emerging forms of warfare may represent some of the most unpredictable flashpoints of all. In the 20th century, global conflicts were defined by armies, tanks, and battlefields. Today, the nature of war is changing. Modern military planners increasingly focus on domains that extend far beyond traditional front lines. Cyber networks, satellites in orbit, and autonomous weapons systems are rapidly becoming critical components of national security strategies. These emerging technologies create new forms of vulnerability and new flashpoints that could escalate tensions between NATO and Russia without a single shot being fired on a conventional battlefield. Flashpoint 4. Cyber warfare. Modern societies rely on digital infrastructure for nearly every aspect of daily life. Electric grids, financial systems, transportation networks, and communication platforms all operate through complex interconnected computer systems. This connectivity has created an entirely new arena for conflict. Cyber warfare. Over the past 2 decades, governments around the world have developed specialized cyber units capable of penetrating networks, stealing sensitive data, or disrupting critical infrastructure. Western intelligence agencies have repeatedly accused Russian-linked groups of conducting cyber operations against government institutions and private companies across Europe and North America. One of the most widely reported incidents occurred in 2017 with the spread of the NotPetya cyber attack, a malicious software campaign that originated during the conflict involving Ukraine. Although initially targeting Ukrainian systems, the attack quickly spread across international networks, causing billions of dollars in economic damage worldwide. Shipping companies, manufacturing firms, and logistics networks across multiple continents were temporarily paralyzed. For security analysts, the incident demonstrated how cyber weapons could unintentionally escalate into global crises. In a future confrontation, cyber operations might target power grids, financial markets, or communication systems across NATO countries. Such attacks could create confusion and panic long before conventional forces become involved. And because cyber operations are often difficult to attribute immediately, determining responsibility could take valuable time, increasing the risk of miscalculation. Flashpoint 5. Space Warfare. High above Earth, another silent competition is unfolding. Thousands of satellites orbit the planet, providing navigation, communication, weather forecasting, and intelligence gathering. Modern militaries depend heavily on these systems for precision operations. But satellites are also vulnerable. Both Russia and the United States have tested anti-satellite weapons capable of disabling objects in orbit. In 2021, Russia conducted a test that destroyed one of its own satellites, creating a large cloud of debris that threatened other spacecraft. The incident raised global concern about the militarization of space. If satellites were targeted during a conflict, the consequences could be immediate. Navigation systems could fail. Military communications could be disrupted. Missile warning systems might become unreliable. In such a scenario, governments could lose critical information needed to avoid escalation, especially between nuclear-armed powers. Flashpoint 6. Autonomous drones and artificial intelligence. Another rapidly evolving area of military technology involves autonomous systems. Unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones, have already transformed modern battlefields. During the war in Ukraine, drones have been used extensively for surveillance, targeting, and precision strikes. Small, relatively inexpensive drones have demonstrated the ability to destroy armored vehicles and artillery positions that once required far more complex weapons. But the next phase of development involves integrating artificial intelligence into these systems. AI-assisted drones could operate in coordinated swarms, sharing data and identifying targets with minimal human input. Military researchers in multiple countries are exploring technologies that allow autonomous systems to react faster than human operators. Supporters argue that such systems could increase precision and reduce casualties. Critics warn that delegating life-and-death decisions to machines introduces serious ethical and strategic risks. If autonomous systems were deployed during a major confrontation, decision-making speeds could increase dramatically. In a crisis between nuclear-armed powers, rapid automated responses might reduce the time available for diplomacy or de-escalation. The result could be a conflict unfolding faster than leaders are able to control. Across Europe, cyberspace, and even Earth's orbit, the potential flashpoints of modern conflict continue to expand. Traditional battlefields remain important. But the next major confrontation between global powers may begin in ways that are far less visible. A cyber intrusion, a satellite disruption, an autonomous system operating beyond direct human command. Each possibility adds another layer of uncertainty to an already fragile security environment. And behind these emerging technologies stands a deeper question. If tensions between Russia and the Western alliance were to escalate further, how would the military balance between them shape the outcome? In military planning, numbers alone rarely determine the outcome of a conflict. Technology, logistics, alliances, and economic capacity often matter just as much as the size of armies. When analysts examine the balance of power between NATO and Russia, they are not simply comparing two countries. They are comparing Russia to a military alliance that spans much of the industrialized world. Formed in 1949, NATO was originally designed as a collective defense pact during the Cold War. Today, it includes more than 30 member states across North America and Europe. At the center of this alliance stands the world's largest military power, the United States. The United States maintains a global network of military bases, advanced naval fleets, and long-range air power. Its defense budget alone exceeds the combined military spending of many other major powers. American aircraft carriers operate as mobile air bases, capable of projecting military power across entire oceans. A single carrier strike group can carry dozens of fighter aircraft, guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, forming a highly mobile and heavily defended naval force. Beyond naval strength, the United States possesses one of the most advanced air forces in the world. Stealth aircraft such as the F-35 and long-range bombers provide the ability to conduct precision strikes against distant targets. But NATO's strength does not rely solely on American power. European members also contribute substantial military capabilities. The United Kingdom operates advanced naval fleets, including modern aircraft carriers and nuclear-powered submarines. The British Armed Forces maintain highly trained expeditionary units capable of rapid deployment. Meanwhile, France possesses its own independent nuclear deterrent and advanced aerospace industry. French forces have significant experience conducting operations across Africa and the Middle East. Further east, Germany has begun increasing defense spending dramatically in response to the war in Ukraine. After decades of relatively limited military budgets, Berlin announced major investments aimed at rebuilding the capabilities of the German armed forces. Other NATO members provide specialized strengths. Poland has rapidly expanded its ground forces and modernized its armored units. Turkey maintains one of the largest standing militaries in the alliance and plays a critical strategic role connecting Europe, the Middle East, and the Black Sea region. In addition to individual national forces, NATO operates an integrated command structure designed to coordinate operations across multiple countries. Joint exercises involving tens of thousands of troops take place regularly across Europe. These drills test the alliance's ability to mobilize quickly in response to potential threats. One of NATO's most important strategic advantages lies in its logistical infrastructure. Road networks, rail systems, and air transport capabilities allow large numbers of troops and equipment to move across Europe relatively quickly. Military planners refer to this as force mobility, the ability to reinforce vulnerable regions before an adversary can gain an advantage. At the same time, NATO benefits from technological cooperation between member states. Shared intelligence systems allow satellites, radar stations, and reconnaissance aircraft to exchange data in real time. This networked approach improves situational awareness across the alliance. Perhaps most importantly, NATO's strength comes from collective defense. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty states that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. This principle creates a powerful deterrent. Any adversary considering a conflict with a single NATO country must assume it could face the combined military forces of the entire alliance. Yet even with these advantages, NATO's military planners remain cautious. Because the alliance's primary rival possesses capabilities that remain among the most formidable in the world. Russia, a country with vast territory, enormous natural resources, and one of the largest nuclear arsenals ever built. And while NATO's power rests on alliances and economic strength, Russia's strategy focuses on concentrated military capabilities designed to counter technologically superior opponents. Understanding this balance requires looking closely at Russia's own military power and the strategic tools it relies upon. While NATO represents the combined military strength of more than 30 nations, Russia remains one of the most heavily armed states in the world. Its military doctrine is built around a different strategic philosophy. Rather than matching NATO's global reach, Russia focuses on maintaining powerful capabilities close to its borders, supported by one of the largest nuclear arsenals ever developed. At the center of this strategy lies nuclear deterrence. Since the end of the Cold War, Russia and the United States have continued to possess the overwhelming majority of the world's nuclear weapons. These arsenals include intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of traveling thousands of kilometers, submarine-launched missiles hidden beneath the oceans, and long-range strategic bombers capable of delivering nuclear payloads. Together, these systems form what military strategists call a nuclear triad, a structure designed to guarantee that even after a devastating first strike, a country would still retain the ability to respond. This concept of mutually assured destruction remains one of the central pillars preventing direct war between nuclear-armed powers. Yet nuclear forces are only one part of Russia's military strategy. Over the past decade, Moscow has invested heavily in advanced missile technologies designed to challenge Western defenses. Among the most widely discussed systems are hypersonic weapons capable of traveling at speeds greater than 5 times the speed of sound. One such system is the Kinshal hypersonic missile, which Russian officials claim can evade many traditional missile defense systems. Another is the Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle, a weapon designed to maneuver unpredictably at extremely high speeds during its descent toward a target. These systems represent a broader effort by Russia to maintain strategic parity with technologically advanced NATO forces. Air defense also plays a critical role in Russian military planning. Russia operates layered air defense networks built around systems such as the S-400 air defense system, designed to track and intercept aircraft, drones, and incoming missiles across large distances. Such systems are often deployed to protect strategic locations, including military bases, industrial infrastructure, and major cities. On land, Russia maintains one of the largest armored forces in the world. Thousands of tanks and armored vehicles remain in active service, supported by artillery systems capable of launching precision-guided munitions. Although some of these platforms trace their origins to Soviet-era designs, many have been upgraded with modern electronics and targeting systems. Meanwhile, the Russian Navy continues to operate strategic submarines equipped with long-range ballistic missiles, a key element of the country's nuclear deterrent. These submarines patrol beneath the Arctic Ocean and other remote maritime regions, providing a concealed second strike capability in the event of a major conflict. In recent years, Russia has also expanded its focus on electronic warfare and cyber operations. Specialized units are tasked with disrupting communications, jamming radar systems, and interfering with satellite signals during potential conflicts. These capabilities are designed to complicate NATO's reliance on advanced digital networks and precision targeting technologies. Yet despite these powerful tools, the war in Ukraine has also revealed important limitations. Sustained combat operations have placed heavy demands on Russia's military resources. Equipment losses, logistical challenges, and economic sanctions have created pressures that military planners must now account for. At the same time, NATO members have continued expanding their own defense spending and technological development. The result is a complex balance of power. On one side stands a large alliance with immense economic and technological capacity. On the other stands a nuclear-armed state with powerful regional military capabilities and a strategic doctrine designed to deter larger adversaries. Both sides maintain forces capable of inflicting catastrophic damage. And because of this reality, direct conflict between them has long been considered one of the most dangerous scenarios in international security. Yet military strength alone does not determine the consequences of war. If tensions were to escalate beyond the point of diplomacy, the impact would extend far beyond the battlefield. Entire economies could collapse, supply chains could fracture, and the stability of the global system itself could be placed at risk. Understanding those potential consequences reveals why preventing such a conflict remains one of the most urgent challenges facing world leaders today. If a direct confrontation were ever to erupt between NATO and Russia, the opening phase would likely unfold with extraordinary speed. Modern militaries operate on timelines measured not in weeks, but in minutes. Satellite surveillance, missile warning systems, and digital command networks allow governments to detect threats almost instantly. Yet the same technologies also compress decision-making time during a crisis. In such a scenario, the first hours of conflict would be dominated by attempts to disable the opponent's military infrastructure. Cyber operations could target communications networks, financial systems, and energy grids across multiple countries. Military planners have long warned that digital attacks against power stations, transportation networks, or internet infrastructure could create widespread disruption even before conventional forces are deployed. At the same time, long-range missile systems could strike strategic targets. Air bases, radar stations, ammunition depots, and command centers would become primary objectives. Both NATO and Russia maintain weapons capable of reaching these sites within minutes of launch. Early warning systems in the United States, Europe, and Russia would immediately begin tracking incoming missiles to determine whether they carried conventional and nuclear payloads, a distinction that might not always be clear in the chaos of the opening phase. Air power would likely play a decisive role during the early stages of the conflict. Fighter aircraft from NATO countries could begin flying defensive patrols across Eastern Europe, protecting airspace over nations such as Poland and Romania. At the same time, Russian aircraft operating from bases within Russian territory or from Crimea could attempt to challenge NATO control of the skies. Naval forces would also become active across several maritime regions. In the Baltic Sea, warships and submarines could attempt to secure critical shipping routes and prevent enemy forces from operating near key ports. Further south, the Black Sea could become a contested zone where naval patrols, missile strikes, and drone surveillance intersect. Meanwhile, ground forces stationed along NATO's eastern frontier would move rapidly to defensive positions. Armored units in Poland and the Baltic states could be reinforced by additional troops arriving from Western Europe and North America. Strategic transport aircraft would carry personnel and equipment across the Atlantic in an effort to strengthen vulnerable front lines. But as these movements unfold, the most dangerous question would remain unresolved. How far would the conflict escalate? Because both sides possess nuclear arsenals capable of destroying entire cities. During the Cold War, military strategists developed the concept of escalation ladders, a framework describing how conflicts between major powers might gradually intensify. Yet history has shown that wars do not always follow predictable paths. A single missile strike on the wrong target, a misunderstood radar signal, a cyber attack disrupting early warning systems. Any of these events could create confusion in the midst of an already volatile situation. And in a conflict involving nuclear-armed states, confusion itself can become one of the most dangerous forces on the battlefield. For this reason, the consequences of a NATO-Russia war would extend far beyond military operations alone. Because once such a confrontation begins, its effects would quickly spread across the global economy, international politics, and the daily lives of billions of people. A direct war between NATO and Russia would not remain confined to battlefields in Eastern Europe. Within days, the consequences would begin spreading across the global system. The modern world is deeply interconnected. Energy markets, food supplies, financial networks, and transportation systems all depend on stable international cooperation. A conflict involving major powers could disrupt these systems on a scale not seen in generations. One of the first impacts would likely be economic. Global markets respond instantly to geopolitical crises. If war erupted between NATO and Russia, stock exchanges around the world could experience severe shocks. International investors might rapidly withdraw capital from vulnerable regions, creating financial instability far beyond Europe. Energy markets would be particularly affected. Before the war in Ukraine, Russia was one of the world's largest exporters of natural gas and oil. Although many European nations have reduced their dependence on Russian energy in recent years, the country remains a significant supplier to global markets. A major escalation could disrupt energy production, pipelines, and shipping routes, driving fuel prices sharply upward. Such increases would affect transportation costs, manufacturing industries, and household energy bills across multiple continents. Food supplies could also face serious disruptions. Both Russia and Ukraine are major exporters of wheat, corn, and other agricultural products. During periods of conflict, farming operations, ports, and shipping infrastructure can become difficult to maintain. Even temporary interruptions in grain exports can lead to price spikes in global food markets, placing additional strain on countries that rely heavily on imported supplies. Another potential consequence involves cyber disruption. Modern financial systems, telecommunications networks, and government institutions rely heavily on digital infrastructure. A large-scale cyber confrontation between major powers could target banks, internet providers, transportation networks, and even healthcare systems. Such attacks would not necessarily be limited to countries directly involved in the conflict. Because digital networks are globally interconnected, cyber operations could ripple across international systems, affecting businesses and services far beyond the immediate conflict zone. Humanitarian consequences would also be severe. The war in Ukraine has already produced millions of refugees. A wider conflict across Eastern Europe could displace far larger populations, forcing civilians to seek safety in neighboring countries. Cities could face shortages of electricity, water, and medical supplies. Hospitals and emergency services might struggle to operate in areas affected by military operations or cyber disruptions. At the highest level of escalation lies the possibility that world leaders have spent decades trying to prevent: nuclear confrontation. Both Russia and the United States maintain thousands of nuclear warheads capable of reaching targets across continents. During the Cold War, the fear of mutual destruction played a paradoxical role in maintaining stability. Leaders understood that a nuclear exchange would have catastrophic consequences for humanity. That logic remains in place today. But modern conflicts introduce new uncertainties: cyber operations affecting early warning systems, autonomous technologies accelerating decision-making, and geopolitical tensions rising across multiple regions at once. In such an environment, the margin for error becomes dangerously small, which is why many experts argue that the greatest challenge of the modern era is not simply preparing for war. It is preventing escalation before it reaches the point where diplomacy can no longer intervene. Because history has repeatedly shown that even the most powerful military alliances cannot easily control the consequences once a global conflict begins. And that realization leads to one final question: what lessons can humanity draw from the past to ensure that the future does not repeat its most devastating chapters? In the quiet moments between crises, the world often forgets how close it comes to disaster. The Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the tense standoffs along Europe's borders, all serve as reminders that global powers can teeter on the edge of conflict without ever crossing the line. Yet the modern era is different. Wars no longer unfold solely on the battlefield. They extend into cyberspace, orbit above the Earth, and rely on machines that can act faster than human reflexes. Autonomous drones, hypersonic missiles, and digital networks amplify both power and risk. Humanity has never faced such complex interconnections. The consequences of miscalculation are not just territorial or political. They are economic, environmental, and existential. A single escalation could ripple across continents, affecting billions of lives in ways unimaginable just decades ago. And yet, despite the stakes, there remains a fragile thread of hope. Diplomacy, strategic restraint, and international institutions continue to act as barriers to the unthinkable. Leaders, analysts, and military planners work daily to maintain a balance that keeps nuclear weapons secure, supply chains open, and communication channels alive. The lesson is both simple and profound. Global peace is neither guaranteed nor permanent. It is a careful balance, maintained through vigilance, restraint, and an unflinching recognition of the catastrophic cost of war. The world may face many flashpoints, but history shows that humanity has the capacity to navigate danger if it chooses caution over confrontation, dialogue over destruction, and foresight over impulse. In that choice lies the hope that the next great conflict may remain a story of what could have been rather than what was.